If you fly helicopters in virtual reality, you already know how much depth perception matters. The Pimax Crystal Super Ultrawide takes that to another level with a massive 140-degree horizontal field of view that could change how you see the world in MSFS 2024. I'm Matthew, I make helicopter tutorials and reviews, and today I'm giving you my first impressions of the ultrawide optical engine. Even if you're not a heli pilot, if you love low-level visual flying, stay with me. Let's jump into what the ultrawide actually feels like and whether it belongs in your setup. Let's fly. And custom scenery in this video comes from the Te Urewera and Rokumura Rangers Huts add-on for MSFS 2024 by Tusk Game Creations. I really love what Kaimanawa Sai has added to the sim with all of these infinite variety of adventures really that we can have with these Huts add-ons. Terrific for helicopter pilots. And what's important for helicopter flying is to use our eyes on these pickups. Now, I didn't quite account for all of the translating tendency there, and I needed to correct with a bit of left cyclic. But I'm looking forwards, but I'm using my peripheral view to assess my spatial movement across the landscape, and that helps me perform my helicopter maneuvers much better. And in the Pimax Crystal Super Ultrawide, I'm loving this. Look at this scenery here. The amount of beautiful visual detail coming in here with this higher resolution mesh that Kaimanawa Sai has used, really effective. Now, as I fly around Taug's Hangar's excellent 500C helicopter add-on, you are looking through the left lens. That's the way the screen capture works in MSFS 2024. You are seeing only the left eye, but there is just something maybe a little bit misleading about this. It looks like there's way more over on the left of this view than what you really get inside the headset. Yes, this looks ultra wide, right? Because you can see way off to the left. But in reality, this is all squeezed into the very edge of the lens into your peripheral view. So you don't really see every pixel over there on maybe the left third or even the left half of the view right now. There I'm looking forwards. That to me is a natural view. The center console is not down in the corner for me. It's kind of to my lower right, but it's not as far push off into the corner as what this view would represent. And the fact that the Pimax Crystal Super Ultrawide needs to receive so much visual information in order to squeeze this using its distortion profiles into the view that you experience inside the headset is why the Crystal Super Ultrawide demands more from your system than the 50 PPD, and even more so than the 57 PPD, which is less than the 50. So you need a beefier system to be able to render all of this extra view, even though you don't actually get to see it directly. It's just squeezed into your periphery and helps to give you that sense, that spatial sense when you're doing these delicate helicopter maneuvers. And as we head over there towards the Rangers, let me put these three fields of view side by side. When I've got the ultra-wide on, when I'm looking straight ahead, I can see from that passenger side fire extinguisher that is fully in my view, and I get a substantial in my peripheral view outside of the pilot's side door there. And here is the Super QLED 50 PPD. Now with this one, I can just get the edge of the passenger side fire extinguisher, and I can see a little bit outside the pilot side door there. And with that smaller field of view, we get a little bit of a performance benefit. And here I am in the Micro OLED. I think you can already see the console looks a lot bigger. That's because the field of view is narrower. I cannot see the passenger side fire extinguisher when I'm looking straight ahead, and I can just barely get the edge of the window on the side there in the pilot side door. So a narrower field of view and even more of a performance gain because of that. Now let's jump back inside to the cockpit for a bit here to talk about, well, I suppose a bit of a negative effect of QLED panels. Now, every optical system is a compromise, and this is one that affects QLED panels in my experience, and that is chromatic aberration. Now, what chromatic aberration looks like is at the edges of your view, Sharp delineations on objects like text especially, but maybe also in flight simulation like this, maybe on a hard edge of a window there or that vertical pillar in front. On one side it might be red and on the other side it might be blue. You get these color fringes. That's chromatic aberration. Now in this QLED ultra-wide panel, I don't think it's worse than the 50 PPD QLED. Uses the same panel after all behind those lenses. I've really tried to study it quite hard, and sometimes it looks like it's more, sometimes it looks like it's the same. I think probably ultimately it's the same. So if you are sensitive to chromatic aberration, it's worth noting that these Pimax Crystal Super QLED panels do have that. Although to assure you, it is just at the edges and it doesn't really appear on scenery, so you don't notice it in trees or terrain or anything like that. So given that I've now had the opportunity to try all of the Crystal Super range except for the 57 PPD QLED, that's the only one I haven't tried, I can maybe offer you this buyer's guide to help you choose which one might be right for you if you are in the market. And if what I'm doing here is creating value for you, maybe you could consider liking this, commenting on the video, subscribing to the channel, of course. Or if you are in the market, you could use the Let's Fly discount code or the affiliate links that are in this video description, because that will help support what I'm doing with all my helicopter tutorials and community events. So let's look at a table here. We have already talked about horizontal field of view. Now, I actually am genuinely impressed with what the ultra-wide offers for helicopter pilots. With that said, the QLED 50 also has very good horizontal field of view, and I feel that the gap between the ultra-wide and the 50 is less of a gap than between the QLED 50 and the Micro OLED. That's a much bigger jump. If field of view is important to you, then maybe you would be leaning more towards that QLED 50 or maybe up to the ultra-wide. Now, chromatic aberration, talked about that as well with these QLED panels. You do get chromatic aberration in the periphery outside of the sweet spot. It's perfectly sharp inside. And for me, once I get flying, I don't really notice the chromatic aberration too much, but people who are sensitive to it might notice it in the QLED panels. With the OLED, much less. Brightness now in the QLED, that's one of the absolute strengths of these QLED panels. Incredibly bright when you're inside of them. It really feels the closest I've experienced to being inside that bright cockpit in real life. The sun's beating in and maybe the light's even harsh. Well, the QLED panels, for me, represent that really well. There's nothing exactly wrong with the OLED's level of brightness. It's just noticeably less than the QLED panels. And then we get to color, and with that incredible brightness that we get in the QLED panels, it does have an effect perhaps of washing out that color a little bit. I actually do not find that unrealistic, and I don't mind the color inside the QLED panels. It's just that when you compare them with the OLED, you get a very different, much more vivid effect inside those OLED panels. And what it reminds me of is, you know, when you go to like a TV showroom and they've got all those massive big panels up there, they're always showing something like Finding Nemo, right, with all those eye-popping colors. That's kind of the effect that I think of when I try to describe the color inside the Crystal Super Micro OLED. Really eye-poppingly vivid colors. I perhaps find that slightly less realistic, but from an aesthetic point of view, I can see why people would put on that OLED headset and go, wow, this color's really something, because it is. And of course, OLED does have that beautiful contrast as well between darks and light colors. It's a wider level of contrast than what you get in the QLED panels. Reflections. Now, I don't really notice any internal reflections inside the QLED panels, but in the OLED panel, I do see a bright sky above reflected into a darker instrument panel below. I get a kind of a mushy outline in the bottom half of the view, and I've got that very bright sky above. If you were flying in nighttime conditions, you wouldn't notice it. If your face shape is different to mine, you just might not notice it. Some people say, wow, I just don't get any kind of reflections at all inside the OLED panel. So I think, you know, your mileage will vary with this one. For me, I actually get really quite strong reflections inside the OLED headset. I'm thinking I might investigate some custom foam padding to try and adjust the way it sits on the face to hopefully reduce those reflections, that glare that exists for me inside the Crystal Super with the OLED optical engine. Now, Mura, that's the screen door effect. Something that I notice in VR, when you look at clouds, it just looks like you're just looking through a very fine mesh sometimes. It is noticeable in the QLED panels. It's even more noticeable in the Crystal Light. However, the QLED panels, for me, once you get going, it's all right. But then when you go over to the OLED, wow, there's almost no Mura at all for me. It's actually really quite spectacular in that level. So it just depends on how sensitive you are to these things. If Mura is important to you, you might be leaning more over towards the OLED. Now, GPU utilization. Now, how do I measure this? What I did is I have locked this off so that the panels are always operating at 72 Hertz, and I limit my maximum frame rate to half of that, 36 frames. So with a limit of 36 frames and with most of the settings on medium, but maybe with terrain level of detail turned up a bit, and with DLSS on balanced, this is what the GPU utilization looks like. On the ultra-wide, it's the highest. I've tuned my graphic settings so that I'm asking about 92 to 93% of my GPU capacity in the kinds of conditions that I am doing in this flight. In fact, I measured it when I was down at the helicopter base there with all that custom scenery. With the QLED 50, it's about 5% less than that. So because it is not having to render that ultra-wide field of view on both sides, you get a bit of a performance saving there. And the OLED with its narrower field of view still asks less of the GPU than either of the other two panels. So if you are at the limit of your performance already with your GPU and your CPU, then you might want to consider leaning more towards something with a narrower field of view, either the Micro OLED or the one I didn't test, the QLED 57, which I would speculate would have about the same level of GPU utilization there as the OLED. It's a similar horizontal field of view. And the one last thing, which I haven't put on the chart because it does change from time to time, that is the price. At the time of making this video, the OLED is significantly more expensive. So get onto the Pimax website, use the affiliate links in the video description here for a little discount, thanks to what I'm doing with this channel, and just see what kind of deals they might be offering for you at the moment and whether that might help influence your decision to go sort of left or right on this chart that I've made for you here. From my point of view, I think the QLED 50 offers a really persuasive middle ground in these calculations. Although if that color and that sweet spot, that chromatic aberration is important to you, maybe you can step up in price to the OLED. And here's what it's all about: assessing visual inputs in 3 dimensions to hit a small target with a moving helicopter whilst balancing all those controls. It's exciting stuff. Any of the Pimax Crystal Super headsets are going to help you get better at this. And if you're worried about making the wrong choice, can I just assure you with this point? I've had a community member just go through a process with Pimax just now. He wasn't thrilled with his first choice of optical engine. It just didn't work for his eyes. And these things are swappable, right? So Pimax is working with him to make sure he gets an engine that works nicely for him. So that's it. I do hope I'll catch you in one of my many other helicopter tutorials and reviews. But for now, see ya!